Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your host, Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello, and welcome back to another edition of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. My name is John Keir, and joining me as always is my co-host, Austin Davidson.
Heyo.
It is Season 4, Episode 9, recording on April 6th, 2019. The draft is fast approaching, and we'll be talking about some tight end prospects as we get closer and closer to the highest positions of need for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And, of course, we'll get into 10 different prospects that we'll be looking at and analyzing in depth for you guys. But first, let's talk about the big football news this week. And that is the fact that last Tuesday, the AAF suspended operations ahead of its Week 9 games and will apparently not finish out its opening season at the will of Chairman Tom Dundon, who is also the owner of the NHL's Carolina Hurricanes. Much to the dismay of players, coaches, fans, and co-founders Charlie Ebersol and Bill Polian, the league has 2 weeks left in its regular season and only had 2 weeks of playoffs after that. The Alliance released a statement due to what you could classify as mistreatment of players and coaches with their jobs essentially being terminated, and they were hung out to dry, many of the players being hours and hours away from home after being kicked out from the team hotels without any place to go and any place to stay. So they released a statement yesterday, and I'll read it for you. This week, we made the difficult decision to suspend all football operations for the Alliance of American Football. We understand that the difficulty this decision has caused for many people, and we are sorry for that. This is not the way we wanted it to end, but we are also committed to working on solutions for all outstanding issues to the best of our ability. Due to ongoing legal processes, we are unable to comment further or share details about the decision. We are grateful to our players who delivered quality football and may now exercise their NFL out clauses in our contracts. We encourage them to continue pursuing their dreams and wish them the best. We are grateful to our fans who have been true believers from the beginning, and to our world-class partners, and to the Alliance coaches and employees who devoted their valuable time and considerable talent to this venture. We are forever grateful. So essentially a statement saying that they could have handled things a lot better and didn't really state much. Not signed, by the way. So 8 weeks into its first season, what looked like a promising season, it's over. And, something that you and I both loved and a lot of other people really enjoyed watching, just like that, it's over.
Yeah, it's really a shame. It feels like the Hurricanes owner is going to be hated forever for this move, because the AAF was like the first successful version of another football league that we had really seen. All the other ones had failed. And now I guess everyone's going to start turning their attention to the XFL coming sometime next year as maybe the next one that could try and replicate it. But, I mean, XFL failed once. It's probably not going to make it again. It's going to be interesting to see, though. The AAF was the best shot because it was working. It was interesting. It felt like, and obviously after some of the AAF players had signed with the NFL, so it was doing its job as well as to develop young guys. And it's really a shame. I was really a big fan of it, even though my team was super messed up and hurt. At least I always had the hat. Actually, looking at the hat right now. But like that's all I got, and that's all that's going to last for it. I'm kind of upset. I thought it was a really good league. I was really enjoying it. I was trying to get everyone to hop on and try and support it, but I guess it wasn't enough for from the owners and the majority owner. So it's just a shame.
At the end of the day, I think you can look back and say that the AAF tried a bunch of different things that were very good, but one thing that the XFL will have that the AAF didn't have is inside investing, and by that I mean Vince McMahon, who owns the WWE and founded the XFL, is funding the XFL, obviously, and because of that, he gets to decide what he wants to do with it. So he's the creator, and he gets to decide what happens. Unfortunately, the AAF could not do this. They were at the mercy of Tom Dundon, and as we know, things didn't end well. So Dundon, for whatever reason, we could talk for hours, I feel, about what Dundon's motives are, whether it's the reported gambling app that he was seeking technology for, or whether it was just the NFLPA not agreeing to give players to the AAF, so the AAF could become sort of a feeder league and could use bottom of the roster players. I feel like we could debate that for a while, but the fact of the matter is he said that he saw a ton of potential, and 10 days after the first games had been played, and all of a sudden he pulled the plug. So I don't know what you want to believe about that, but it sucks because you put faith in a guy. It's easy to say they should have had a backup plan, but I don't know. I feel like it was kind of rushed in terms of finances, but at the same time, there's only so much they can do. If this could have been any other investor, and the fact that it happened the way it did was just really unfortunate. It's frustrating because I feel like the XFL has a stronger foundation, but I don't like what they'll be doing as much as I like what the AAF was trying to do. The AAF had a goal to be, at least Ebersol and Polian wanted to have it stand out on its own for a couple years and then eventually go try and become a feeder league for the NFL. And then Dundon seemed to push this right away, and when it didn't work, he just gave up. That's at least how it appeared to me.
Yeah, it did feel like it was just giving up and then it was just folding in. It really didn't seem like the reasons that were given didn't make me, I mean, it was never going to make me feel good, but I didn't feel like, that was a solid reason to close the AAF. I was left feeling more upset than I really could have been. I mean, he could have said, like they could have said they really couldn't afford to pay the players or something like that, but the idea, everything that's coming out is saying he just wanted the technology or something like that, as you mentioned, the technology for the gambling stuff. And it's just, I find it stupid. And I wish bad things upon the Canes. Not injuries, just I hope they lose the first round of the playoffs, which they should.
I don't know. It's just, it is an unfortunate situation. And what's more frustrating than anything, because while everything we've talked about just this last couple minutes is frustration from our point of view, what's really unacceptable is the way that players and coaches were treated on the way out. And you're talking about players, even former Steelers players like Joshua Frazier, the former 7th-round pick from this past season, basically left to deal with their own injuries. They left their own medical bills. They were left with hotel bills. And these were all expenses that they would have never expected to have to pay. And now all of a sudden, I forget which team it was. I think it was Memphis, arrived back from practice the day the league made their decision, or Dundon made his decision, and all their things were packed and they were basically told to leave. They couldn't even keep their jerseys. I mean, that seems like a horrible way to treat these players, and especially most of these guys, because we are seeing some guys get their shot, and we'll get into that at the end of the show, but most of these guys, you think about it, for a good amount of them, they might never put on not an NFL, but they might never put on the football shoulder pads and jersey again.
Yeah, and that's really rough, and it's really unfair how the AAF did treat them. They really should have had like a emergency thing for this type of situation. They should have had, I think you could say that they should have had a backup plan to where, like, okay, we're closing the league, but we should at least treat our players like human beings at the end of it and not make them travel, and if they're stuck somewhere, make them have to pay for it, because that's just wrong. It's just really, really fundamentally wrong. It's like you said, it's just another reason why the endings, this was just so bad. There was so much wrong with how the AAF closed. It was terrible.
And mind you, it's not like Dundon wouldn't be able to pay for guys to get home or at least help out with some medical bills. What I really think that that above anything else is what you should be mad at Tom Dundon for. If you want to be upset at him for pulling the plug on the league like I am frustrated. But more than anything, it's the players and coaches and the guys who are left with injuries, left far from home and have to find their way back, which is literally just that's the most frustrating thing. And I don't know what to make of I suppose the league is technically not dead, but I mean, we know that the season will not be completed and it's going to take a lot for the league to get started again.
Yeah, that's really what it boils down to, just being trash. This whole thing is trash. How the players were treated, trash. The league ending, trash. Again, Tom Dundon, super trash.
And I guess with that, what sucked is that today I got home from work and I was like, I feel like I should be watching football, and that's just I watched all but one game, or listened to all but one game, and that was because I literally was unable to, because I was doing something else, a family function. But I watched every game, and it felt so weird not being able to watch any games today. So I guess I'm sorry, did you want to say something?
No, I'm good. I really wasn't going to have to have anything good to add.
Okay. So I guess now our attention for spring ball would turn to the XFL in 2020. And the one thing I think that is interesting is that with the CBA looking to expire, I don't know exactly what their response will be, but I think that they might have a decent chance to at least have a first season that's relatively successful, since the NFL could be going through a lengthy lockout.
Yeah, I think that the NFL is 100% going to be locked out in, I think that, what is it, the 2021 season or 2020 season?
I think it's the end of
when the CBA expires?
It's the end of the 2020 season, so it'll be 2021.
Okay, yeah, I think there's no avoiding that. I think the franchise tag is going to be the biggest thing, because it seems like players very, very much hate the franchise tag, as we saw with Le'Veon Bell. And DeMarcus Lawrence ended up winning, but he was mad about being franchise tagged again this year. And Frank Clark right now. Frank Clark is thanking DeMarcus Lawrence with everything in his body, but Frank Clark's probably still pissed that he's on the franchise tag. And same with Jadeveon Clowney. Jadeveon Clowney has actually been quiet, but the franchise tag is just something that players universally hate. And there's some other things that need to be negotiated as well that players don't like. There's tons of little details. So I think the NFL, we're gonna end up missing at least a few weeks in the 2021 season.
And regardless, I think it'll be interesting. But we can talk about we'll have plenty of time to talk about the XFL. So let's move on to some Steelers news. A couple former AAF players have been brought in for either visits or have been signed. Two former Birmingham Iron players from my favorite team signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers, including center J.C. Hasenauer, I believe is how you say it, and defensive back Jack Tocho to one-year contracts. They also brought in former Atlanta Legends edge player J.T. Jones for a tryout. Do you have any thoughts on those players?
No, I didn't really get to see much of them, because I honestly didn't get to watch as much AF as I would have wanted to. I really only watched Fleet games, and I actually missed the Iron Fleet game because I was at work. I only got to really listen to it, so I don't really know much about them, especially not Hasenauer. But I think I've heard good things about Jack. How did you say it? Tocho? Taco?
Tocho, I believe is how you say it.
Yeah, I've heard good things about him. I've been looking at the comments and stuff, and I feel like he's going to be a good. He has a chance to stick around. Is what I'm trying to say.
Morgan Burnett has signed a 2-year, $9 million contract with the Cleveland Browns. What do you think about that?
I think that's trash, and I think that Seth Roberts is going to destroy him twice a year, because we saw it happen last year, and Seth Roberts has now joined the Baltimore Ravens, so now he has to face Seth Roberts twice a year, his worst enemy.
All right, let's talk about the tight end position. We've got 5 tight ends on the roster as of right now. we obviously have your starter, Vance McDonald. You have your former number 3 tight end, and Xavier Grimble. 2 practice squad players in Bucky Hodges and Christian Scotland-Williamson, and a new addition in Kevin Radar. All of them theoretically have 1 year left on their deal. McDonald has 2 team options, though, so I have to imagine that he'll be picked up at least next season and possibly the year after. And we already know Jesse James signed a 4-year contract with the Detroit Lions. So let's talk about this. With Vance McDonald being the runaway guy here, can we expect him to continue to build off of his breakout 2018 campaign where I believe he had 50 grabs? I'm going to double check his statistics real quickly here. McDonald finished with 50 grabs, 610 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So all tied or surpassed career highs this past season. So do you think he can continue to improve, or do you think that's about what we can expect?
I'm going to say that's about what we can expect. I think Vance McDonald kind of shook the injury bug last year. He still missed the first game of the season, but I feel like he misses so many games due to injury. I feel like that's what he's going to max out. I feel like he's going to miss at least 1 game, and it's going to cause him to have like a little bit less stats than he actually could have. Because I think he's still a good player, obviously. I think he's a really good tight end. I've been happy ever since he's been here. But I just think that the fact of the matter is that he's oft injured, and I think it's going to hold his stats back for however long his career is. I think he's going to end up just missing 1 or 2 games every year or so. At least that's what I kind of expect. With something's going to be wrong.
I can definitely see that. If he does play a full 16 games next year, I think we could expect maybe closer to 60 grabs, maybe around 700, 750 yards, and hopefully around 6 touchdowns. So if he's going to improve, I wouldn't expect it to be by much, only marginally. And now let's talk about the number 2 tight end. There really isn't a guy on here who has been anything more than a number 3 tight end at best. Xavier Grimble's been the number 3 for the past 3 seasons. Bucky Hodges and Christian Scotland-Williamson are practice squad guys. Do any of these guys have a legitimate shot to be a number 2 guy? And if not, then who's going to be the number 3?
I don't think any of these guys really have a shot to be number 2. Bucky Hodges, I think, has a chance to challenge Xavier Grimble for the number 3 spot. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a draft pick that's sitting at the number 2 spot this upcoming season, because I think that the Steelers need a guy that's a little bit better than Xavier Grimble and Bucky Hodges. I mean, I thought Bucky Hodges flashed. That's why I think he's going to beat out Xavier Grimble for a roster spot this year. I thought he was going to do it last year possibly, but I think he came on a little too late, so they didn't feel like they got enough time with him. But I think that they need a little bit better guy, and I think they need to get in the draft. What do you think?
I'm in complete agreement with you. So they need to get a number 2 tight end. So there's 2 ways of going about this. I already talked about Max Williams before. He's a guy that could be a potential free agent signing, or they could go in the draft. But I think regardless of how you look at it, I think they need to add at least 1 guy who can be the number 2, if not 2 guys.
Yeah, I see that. I feel like Xavier, all of these guys, no matter how you look at it, even if you think that these guys are going to make it onto the roster, there's only 1 year remaining on everyone's deal except for Vance McDonald, who has a team option, who is technically still only has 1 year left, depending on the team options, how the Steelers choose to go. So no matter what, the Steelers need to draft a tight end here, in my opinion.
And again, like you were saying, 1 year on their deals, all these guys, even Hodges or Grimble, who could be the number 3, they're all replaceable.
Oh, 100%. They are all practice squad guys in my eyes as of right now. Even Xavier Grimble, he made the roster last year, but I mean, let's be honest, he's not really the greatest. He only gets like 5 catches a year, 6 catches.
Yeah, he's basically a blocking presence. So from our point of view, the tight end position needs to be upgraded. So for that reason, we think that there's definitely going to be 1 taken in the draft. So we looked at 10 different guys across several different schools. So let's start with Alize Mack from Notre Dame. Actually, why don't you list your prospects? I'll list mine first. I've got the 2 talented Iowa tight ends, TJ Hawkinson and Noah Fant, followed by Stanford tight end Caden Smith. Trayvon Wesco from West Virginia, and then finally Zach Gentry from Michigan. So tell me about your 5 guys, and then start with Alize Mack.
Alize Mack from Notre Dame is my first one. I would have 100% mispronounced his name if I had not watched his tape, by the way. His name looks like Alize Mack, but it's Alize, in case anyone was wondering. Then after that, it's Irv Smith Jr. from Alabama. Then we got Foster Moreau from LSU. Following Foster Moreau comes Drew Sample from Washington. And after that comes Donald Parham from Stetson, which I had never heard of Stetson until I found out about Parham.
All right, so start with Alize Mack, please.
Well, he is 6'4" and 249 pounds, and he was a big deal coming out of high school. He came from a Las Vegas school that had won 6 straight high school titles, as well as a national championship one of the years he was playing. He went on to join the Fighting Irish, and he got to start 5 games as a true freshman, getting 13 catches for 190 yards through 13 games played. Due to poor grades, Mack became academically ineligible in 2016, so he couldn't play, but he worked hard to get back to being eligible in 2017. In 2017, he started 6 games, getting 19 passes for 166 yards, an average of 8.7 yards per catch, and a touchdown. That may not sound great, but Notre Dame was really struggling to get a passing game going. They didn't really have a passing identity, so it was actually better than it looks. Then in 2018, he caught 36 passes for 360 yards, an average of 10 yards per catch, and 3 touchdowns. So let's get straight into his positives. I had to look it up to make sure, but I saw a potential top 15 pick, Rashawn Gary, get stonewalled by Alize Mack himself in their game against Michigan. And from his tape, I saw Mack as a pretty solid blocker with the potential to become a better move blocker if he's willing to do the dirty work. And being able to block is important to me right now for what the Steelers need. They need a number 2 tight end, and I feel like they need a guy that could kind of do it all. But Notre Dame used several tight ends on the field at once as well, so he's done well in both pass blocking and run blocking. He showed ability in both. So in 2 tight end sets, he could be pretty effective as a blocker as well. Then I like his speed. He comes off the snap with a really solid early push, and he's got straight line speed you want out of an NFL tight end. Then with how bad Notre Dame's passing game has been, Mack has gotten the knack for plucking the ball out of the air and tucking it in when the balls are thrown outside of his frame, and has also proven that he can absorb contact and still make the catch in traffic. On the tape, he also shows the ability to track balls really well and make impressive body adjustments to haul it in, which is also a product of poor passing. Last couple things. Firstly, he's very comfortable working from the slot, which is a plus, and then finally he has the necessary hand quickness when throws are put right on him out of breaks. So, flipping to the other side, I think Mack's biggest weakness is his lack of agility and elusiveness. As an open field runner, he just doesn't have the moves to shake defenders and get those yards after the catch. He also fails to elude defensive backs who go to chop his legs, and I watched him get knocked down so many times because of that. He's also inconsistent at avoiding forceful route redirection from defenders, as well as the only plays this only plays into his lack of elusiveness. He's just not elusive is all I'm trying to say. Now after that, I know I said his blocking was decent, and I stand by that because I saw he could handle big guys, but there are a few aspects that still need some work. Firstly, his positioning and footwork need to be better as a blocker. Like I said, when defenders were chopping at his feet, he fell over almost every time, and a lot of that is because of his footwork. He also doesn't always position himself to take on more pressing or dangerous defenders streaming in, so he needs to work on that as well. Another thing is that on the second level, he fails to look for and find work, and I think it was just laziness. He kind of just stops too early on the play for my liking. But now moving on from his blocking issues, he got some posture issues. Firstly, he plays with some hip tightness that limits how sharp he can come out of breaks and his stride length. And this has affected how quickly he can open up to his quarterback on comebacks. He also plays upright into his breaks as well, so I can't forget to mention that. It's just a small problem he has. Last thing I will say is his drop rate was pretty disappointing over his final 2 college seasons, so that's something to consider as well. So the bottom line is Mac interests me a lot, actually. He has a bad drop rate, and his routes aren't the sharpest, but I think he could be a sleeper in this year's draft, and here's why. I kept harping on Notre Dame's passing game, and the fact of the matter is this. Winbush is terrible, in my opinion. Winbush is Notre Dame's quarterback, if y'all aren't aware. I kept watching plays where Winbush didn't throw to Mac, and just found myself judging Winbush in the process of reviewing Mac. He missed so many throws to everyone on the field, and there were times where I would be asking myself why, while watching Mac run out on the field, why he wasn't getting the ball. I felt like Winbush was the problem. So I'm going to say with a better quarterback that isn't, my first read's not there, time to run. Because also, if you just don't know much about Winbush, he's like a Lamar Jackson type. He's like a even worse Lamar Jackson. So he basically just defaults to running on every play. But I think Mac could thrive with a better quarterback, is what I'm trying to say. Mac needs to work on his aggressiveness as well, though. I saw he could handle NFL talent as a blocker, but he just plays lazily at times. If he could work on that, I 100% think Mac will be a steal in this draft. Right now, though, I think he's going to be a late fourth-round pick, possibly an early fifth-round pick because of lack of production in college, which, again, he still would be a steal in my mind. So that was Alize Mack from Notre Dame. Let's hear about your first tight end, which I believe to be T.J. Hawkinson, right?
Yes, it is the highest-ranked, almost a consensus highest-ranked tight end coming into the draft this year from Iowa. Iowa has apparently an abundance of riches at the tight end position. They've had George Kittle, T.J. Hawkinson, and Noah Fant, who I'll be talking about, as three guys who will be going to the NFL and seem primed for success. But let's talk about Hawkinson first, the 6'5", 251-pound redshirt junior. I watched his games against Iowa State, Penn State, and Mississippi State from this past season. A former three-time All-Iowa selection in high school first team, redshirted as a freshman in 2016, and then became a number 2 tight end in 2017, catching 24 passes for 320 yards, 3 touchdowns in 13 games, starting 12. And then split time with Noah Fant last year, but still won the John Mackey Award for the nation's best tight end, named Big Ten Tight End of the Year, and started 13 games, caught 49 passes for 760 yards and 6 touchdowns, finishing as first-team All-Big Ten selection as well, and he averaged over 13 yards per catch over his 2 seasons. I really liked what I saw from T.J. Hawkinson. He lined up with both his hand in the ground on the end of the line of scrimmage, lined up in the slot, and occasionally lined up on his own on the outside. Hawkinson was an instrumental part of the Hawkeyes' ground game during his career. He's an athletic blocker who routinely can reach block effectively. He was asked to block for receivers on screens and can get out in space as well. He's effective out there. He's often asked to block on the move as far as a puller as well, and he did that pretty well. He uses good technique to seal off defenders from the backside, has a strong punch, and finishes blocks effectively. He's really helpful for any team that's looking to add a run-blocking tight end. And the reason why he's so highly touted going into the draft is that he's a good receiver, too. He's not the Jimmy Graham, Rob Gronkowski, deep up the seam kind of guy. He can run up the seam, but he's not going to run many deep routes besides seam passes, but he does control the short to intermediate area of the field very well. He has good quickness that allows for work in the intermediate areas of the field. He runs sharp routes against tight coverage and uses his frame to box out defenders perfectly. He has sticky hands, rarely making drops, and will catch the ball away from his body, including one crucial and very difficult catch on what could have been a potential game-winning drive against Penn State, where he was diving along the sidelines, and it would have been a catch in the NFL too. And he's able to make contested grabs. It's something you always like to see. And something else that's really nice is he's got great yak potential. He carries guys down the field like Rob Gronkowski always used to. So he's a versatile guy that can do a bunch of different things. And although he's not going to catch the ball like Noah Fant does, or he's not going to work as far down the field, he can still do just about anything else. On the problem side, he had a tougher time blocking against a bigger defense in Mississippi State. He was quiet against them for most of the game, which was their bowl game. And he's lacking NFL muscle mass at this point. He needs to continue to grow, so I wouldn't expect him to be a dominant blocker in year one. He also doesn't have the agility to break away from defenders in intermediate zone coverage most of the time, especially against athletic linebackers and safeties. He'll mistime his jumps and won't high point the ball very well. He's a little too eager to get to the second level in run blocking, which if you've ever been told anything about a blocker, you have to take care of the first level first before you go to the second level. He tends to leave and get a little too eager, which is a bad habit. He's not a good pass blocker right now. He'll get run over. And again, like I said before, he doesn't run deep routes, but then again, how many tight ends do that? Not a lot. So TJ Hawkinson, I really, really liked him. He might be my favorite player that I looked at so far. He's got great talent, potential, and he's got the tape to back it up. He's athletic, he's big, he's strong, he's a willing and able blocker, and he's an option in the passing game. Maybe not to the degree of someone like Jimmy Graham, but he reminds me a lot of what Heath Miller was like. And personally, if he falls to number 20, I would not be mad if the Steelers took him right there. Despite the fact that tight ends usually don't do a whole lot in their first year or two in the league, I think he would be a fantastic add wherever he goes, and I think for years to come he's going to be one of, if not the best tight end in the league. I really think that highly of him. So TJ Hawkinson was a personal favorite of mine. I would be ecstatic if he ended up in Pittsburgh, but I also wouldn't expect it either, but time will tell. So with that, let's hear a little bit about Irv Smith Jr., the Alabama tight end.
Well, surprisingly, this is the first Alabama prospect either of us are looking at. He is 6'2" and 242 pounds. He has an NFL bloodline, as his father was drafted by the New Orleans Saints out of Notre Dame in the first round of 1993. And thus, Irv Smith Jr. grew up in New Orleans. Coming out of high school, he was Class 5A honorable mention, All-Louisiana pick, being regarded as a top 10 tight end prospect in the nation before signing with the Crimson Tide. In his first season, he played as a reserve in 9 games and had no stats. In 2017, he got to start 4 of 14 games, getting 14 catches for 128 yards, an average of 9.1 yards per catch, and 3 touchdowns. In 2018, he got himself second team All-SEC honors, catching 44 passes for 710 yards, a 16.1 yards per catch average, and 7 touchdowns. Irv Smith Jr. decided to declare for the draft early, foregoing his senior season, and now here we are. So what's good about him is, opposed to Mack, Irv Smith Jr. has some really solid agility and elusiveness for a tight end. He's really just a pretty good athlete, as he tied for the 3rd fastest 40 time at the Combine. You can see it on the field, too. He easily runs past linebackers with his speed. He's going to be a mismatch in that sense at the NFL level, as he can put an immediate stream in the seam or downfield. He could really play all over the field, though. He was used all over the field at Alabama with all different routes that they had him run. Something that interested me when watching his tape, though, is how often he's used as an H-back or fullback. He's proven to be a solid lead blocker from the backfield in that position for Josh Jacobs and Damian Harris in this past season. Having spent a lot of time playing from that position, Alabama has a lot of packages that use him there. But now, something I also like about Smith Jr. is the play strength he possesses in multiple areas. To start off, he's got some pretty good hand strength to be able to come down with contested catches. Then he has good leg strength to keep a defender from pushing him off his route. And then lastly, for his play strength, he could drag tacklers for more yards after the catch. Just to wrap up the positives, though, he can get up and compete in the air for contested catches pretty well. I saw that on this tape. Now, my biggest concern with him is his route running. Sure, he ran a large route tree, but his routes aren't sharp and end up being more rounded, which helps defenders cover him. It essentially neutralizes the speed he has because he's not running these sharp routes. My next biggest thing is his blocking is going to need some work at the NFL level. He doesn't really have either the mass or upper body size to handle NFL pass rushers right now, so he's going to need to try and fix that, but that's not his only problem. He doesn't always put a lot of effort into his blocks, and that laziness isn't going to work at the NFL level. He's also overstepped some of his targets as a run blocker, so that's something to look out for as well. Now, something that isn't great is that he's not a natural hand catcher and fights the football in the process of the catch. So I watched his tape versus Georgia, and he dropped a wide-open pass that would have been over a 30-yard gain. It was at a crucial point in the game, too. I forget what exactly was the score, but if you guys remember that game against Georgia, it was a pretty popular one. Georgia went up pretty quickly, and it looked like Alabama was losing it. And then obviously their quarterback went down, Tua, and Hurts had to come back in. But so he dropped what would have been a 30-yard gain in what would have been probably a tide-changing pass, and it really hurt me. And that was the biggest example for me. It was pretty tough to watch at the time. Then something I want to circle back to is how he plays lazily. He doesn't always play fast, and he hardly ever works his way back to the throw. And again, if he continues with that ethic, he's never going to end up playing for an NFL team. Now, a couple other things. When he turns around to find the football, he slows down way too much. And then finally, while he's pretty good at looseness in general, his short area moves are lacking. So for Irv Smith, I watched a lot of tape from Alabama's most important games this season, like the national championship and the Georgia game. And I feel like Smith Jr. is a big contributor in clutch situations and could probably be a really good blocker if he just got his weight up. I am, however, concerned with his laziness. I think he needs an NFL coach to wake him up and get him giving his all every play, because he could really be a force at the next level. He could really do anything that's asked of him, so I think Smith Jr. will go somewhere in the second round. There's a very small chance in my mind that he falls into the third, but overall, I think Smith Jr. is just too good of a player to slip that far. So that was Irv Smith Jr. out of Alabama. Let's hear about the other Iowa tight end, Noah Fant.
Yes, Noah Fant. He is different from T.J. Hawkinson. I'm glad you mentioned that Irv Smith lined up as an H-back, because I also want to mention that T.J. Hawkinson did that as well. So I'd forgot to mention that. So Noah Fant, if things weren't going well enough in Iowa with having one great tight end, they decided they would be doing just dandy with two. And Noah Fant, a junior, standing at 6'4" and 249 pounds, he is special in his own right. I watched his games against Iowa State and Penn State as well. A two-time All-Nebraska selection in high school. He is a really smart person, to be completely honest with you. He plans to be an orthopedic surgeon after his playing days, so you got to go to a lot of school for that. So he's clearly got a plan once his playing days are over. As a true freshman in 2016, he caught 9 passes for 70 yards and a touchdown in a reserve role through 11 games. Became a regular in 2017, being named a third-team All-Big Ten player with 30 catches for 494 yards and 11 touchdowns. And then as a co-starter with T.J. Hawkinson, caught 39 passes for 519 yards and 7 touchdowns, being named first-team All-Big Ten and third-team All-American while starting in 8 games and played in 12. Important to note that he did skip his team's bowl game while T.J. Hawkinson played. So what's good about Noah Fant is he's a fantastic athlete. He's such a good athlete that he's actually superior to T.J. Hawkinson, and when you watch the two of them next to each other, he just looks so much he doesn't play a lot faster, but he just looks faster, and he's got fantastic acceleration off the line of scrimmage. He just looks like a guy that's going to be a seam buster in the NFL. He's got great burst. He has long strides down the field. He's tall and he's long, and he can work the whole field when combining the natural size he has with his athleticism. He averaged 1 touchdown per 4.5 receptions in college. That's a crazy touchdown percentage, and unlike T.J. Hawkinson, Fant can high point the ball very well. So when you talk about a 6'5" guy jumping through the roof and high pointing the ball very well, that's a nightmarish scenario. And he's got good hands. He can catch passes off his shoelaces at times. And Hawkinson might have been a good yak guy because he could drag people. Noah Fant can be a great yak guy because he's got 4.5 speed from the 40-yard dash. He can move. And he's not a great blocker, but he's a decent blocker, and he has good hand placement and uses his frame well, so that's always a good place to start. I did mention the blocking, though. There are things that could be better about Noah Fant. He has a thin frame that's lacking play strength right now, and he's not as willing a blocker as T.J. Hawkinson. He just doesn't possess the same grit and determination that Hawkinson routinely shows play after play as a run blocker for Iowa. He'll give up the backside far too often, which you might not think is a big deal, but oftentimes backside blocks can make or break a play. Linebackers can divert him off the route at times with physicality, and he needs to learn how to fight through contact when he's at the top of his route. Fant doesn't have sharp breaks on routes, meaning that he's not as active in the short or intermediate game as a TJ Hawkinson is. Man coverage is easier for defenders in that sense. Fant also has a drop problem. He loses focus in the middle of the field and actually had 3 drops in one game as well. He doesn't use his frame to get open like Hawkinson does, and he's not good at finding holes in the zone. And he just really has trouble adjusting to underthrown passes. There were several underthrown passes that I saw over the 2 games I watched, and he couldn't catch them. Now, granted, he shouldn't have to be catching underthrown passes that are at your shoelaces very often, and apparently he can do it, but I didn't see it very often. He did struggle a couple of times in trying to grab it. So he's a raw route runner, but he's athletic, and he's got room to grow. So when being compared to TJ Hawkinson, scouts can see that Noah Fant is his own standout player, but Hawkinson's more well-rounded game makes him a more attractive option here. Still, though, Fant is at least a capable blocker that can improve, and despite his drops in raw route running ability, proper coaching should help him improve at the next level. And when he does improve, he could be the next great receiving tight end, similar to a Jimmy Graham or Travis Kelce. He's either the second or third best tight end in this draft, right behind or in front of Irv Smith, according to analysts. Many expect him to be a late first-round selection or even a second-round pick. Look, even if he never becomes a great blocking tight end, he's going to last in this league at the end of the day. So he's definitely a guy that should get drafted and will probably be drafted early. I would not think he'd be a bad consolation prize if a team misses out on TJ Hawkinson, even though he is a different type of player. So that was Noah Fant, the other Iowa tight end. Let's talk a little bit about Foster Moreau from LSU, Austin.
Well, he's 6'4" and 253 pounds, and I couldn't find any evidence, but I believe Foster Moreau to be related to Douglas Moreau, a former tight end for the AAF who was drafted by the Miami Dolphins in the 1966 draft. I mean, there's a lot of similarities there, both born in New Orleans, both tight ends that went to LSU, same last name. I think it's his grandfather, but again, I couldn't actually find anything that said, yeah, that's definitely his grandfather. But anyhow, in Moreau's first season at LSU, he played in 12 games and got to start one, but did not catch a pass. In his sophomore season, he started 3 of 11 games, getting 6 catches for 79 yards and a touchdown. In 2017, he got a lot more playing time and got 24 receptions for 278 yards and 3 touchdowns through 13 starts. In his final season, he started all 13 games as well, getting 22 catches for 272 yards and 2 touchdowns. So what's good about Moreau is he really has all the tools to be a successful blocker at the NFL level. He's got a good base and core strength as an inline blocker. He keeps good positioning of feet and hips when blocking. He's relentless in his blocks, being described as sticky because defenders can't seem to get off of him. He has shown consistently that he can gather his weight and strike targets hard in space. He keeps his hand placement inside a defender's frame and is well-conditioned enough to maintain his great blocking technique through an entire game. So I watched quite a few of his games, and Moreau, to me, is a shoo-in to be a great blocking tight end. He just plays with that desire ferocity you want. He's honestly probably the second best blocker in this tight end class, only behind Wesco, one of John's prospects. He does have some positives as a receiver, too. He has a good sense for using his frame to block out a defender on a contested catch, and he's also is essentially a freight train after the catch. He becomes very hard to tackle once he gets to full speed with the ball in his hands. But now let's put the other side. Watching Moreau, I felt like his play speed was slow. He didn't actually have a bad 40 time either. He ran the 5th fastest time, but he just seems sluggish with his get-off speed, and that makes him feel slower. It doesn't help that he's slow into his breaks either, but it has made it easy for linebackers to find him and get him blanketed because he just isn't really a speed threat. Then he doesn't do that great a job trying to create space in tight quarter throws. Only thing he really does is try and block out the defender, but it makes the throw very tight for the quarterback. Now, I know I raved about his blocking, but there are still areas where he can improve. Firstly, his pace needs to speed up a bit for move blocks at the NFL level. He is slow there as well, and it's hurting him. And then finally, he's shown to be a little bit clumsy in tight quarters where there's a lot of foot traffic going on. But the bottom line for Moreau is he's been compared to Logan Paulson. But personally, when I look at Moreau, I see David Johnson, a great blocking tight end who may get you 5 to 10 catches a year. I think Moreau is going to end up hanging around the NFL, kept as a number 2 or number 3 tight end for several years as a blocking option. But I don't think he's going to develop more than that. He just doesn't have the speed to keep up with NFL defenders. And even though his hands are actually pretty solid, he's always going to be draped in coverage. I personally think that he's going to go in the 5th round, but I could see a team taking him late in the 4th to make a safe pick for a need at blocking tight end. Because I think, like I said, I think he's going to last in the NFL, just being known as a cheap blocking tight end. So that was Foster Moreau out of LSU. Let's hear about your next prospect.
Caden Smith from Stanford. He's trying to become, I believe it's the 4th straight tight end to be drafted from Stanford that has been drafted in the 4th round or sooner. Will he get there that far or that early? We'll see. I'm not sure that he can, but time will tell. I watched his games against Oregon and USC this year, both Pac-12 games. Smith was a former 5-star recruit from Texas that didn't play in his freshman season of 2016 but didn't redshirt. He became a key reserve as a sophomore in 2017, catching 23 passes for 414 yards and 5 touchdowns. He scored 2 touchdowns against USC in the Pac-12 title game, though, which caught scouts' attention. He was actually a Mackey Award finalist, though, in 2018, making a jump as a starter, and despite missing 3 games, catching 47 passes for 635 yards and 2 touchdowns in 10 starts. So Caden Smith, standing at 6'5" and 255 pounds, is actually a little above average for a size of an NFL tight end. And thanks to playing at Stanford, Smith has experience running in the traditional pro-style offense and can block accordingly. Good grit and toughness displayed at the point of attack as a blocker. Smith has good hand strength and does a good job of sticking to his block when he gets on them. Good hips as a blocker give Caden Smith extra power and leverage, and he has the size to kick out linebackers on the edge when he pulls, and that's a key. Physicality at the top of his route allows Smith to get separation from defenders on hooks and curls and ins and out routes, and he can make contested catches too. He transitions from his route to being ready for a catch quickly, so he'll whip his head around and he'll be ready to grab the ball quickly. So those short routes that he runs, he'll be open really quickly, so expect a lot of pop passes for him when he gets to the NFL. What's not to like about Caden Smith, though, his release from the line of scrimmage into his route isn't quick, so if he doesn't get a clean release, everything I just mentioned about him being able to get ready for a catch quickly, that's not going to matter. Athletic linebackers are going to stick to him in coverage. He's really not that fast of a guy. I looked at all of his combine results. He tested below average in everything except for the 3-cone drill, which means he's got really good. Agility, at least in that sense. But the 20-yard shuttle wasn't very good. His 40-yard dash time was just under 5 seconds at 4.92 seconds, which tested second to last of qualifying tight ends, so that's a little concerning. He doesn't fight through traffic at the start or middle of his route, and his hand usage on defenders is too wide, allowing guys to cross him up sometimes, and he'll struggle to pick up blitzes as well. Caden Smith isn't very fast, like I just said. He's going to have to rely on scheme to get open most of the time, and if he's running down the field, think of the fake receiver screens the Steelers used to run, where the tight end would end up wide open. We saw that used against the Giants and Cowboys in 2016. So it would take plays like that to get him open most of the time. So Caden Smith, not a lot to say with him. He reminds me a lot as of what Jesse James was in Pittsburgh in terms of not being flashy. I think James was a far better receiver, though, in terms of route running. Smith might be a better blocker, but nothing really stands out on tape for me. He's pretty much decent across the board. He can block, he can catch. He's not really a detriment anywhere for you, but he also won't add a ton either. He's a high-effort player and has room to improve, but he's really not athletic enough to become a full-time starter. I think his upside is literally what Jesse James was and is, potentially at best a co-starter with another tight end where he's the 1B option. Not a bad player, though. Still, though, a deep tight end class, I wouldn't want to pick him until day 3, so that means unless if he's picked in the early part of that day, he would not continue that streak of 4th round or earlier for Stanford tight ends. So that was Caden Smith from Stanford University. Talk to me a little bit about Drew Sample.
Well, he's from Washington. He's 6'5" and 255 pounds. Sample grew up in Bellevue, Washington, where he was an all-King County selection from Newport High School. In his redshirt freshman season, he caught 5 passes for 45 yards and 2 touchdowns in 13 games, with 7 of those games being starts. He earned the team's Tough Husky Award in the process of that. And then in his sophomore season, he was an honorable mention All Pac-12 selection for catching 9 passes for 106 yards and 11.8 yards per catch average. And then in his junior year, he played through a leg injury, earning the team's Don James Perseverance Award for his efforts, catching 7 passes for 84 yards and 8 starts through 10 games played. His final season was his best in terms of production, catching 25 passes for 252 yards, which is an average of 10.1 yards per catch, and also caught 3 touchdowns. With his best season behind him, Sample declared for the draft. So Sample really possesses the desired NFL size, coming in as the biggest tight end in terms of weight that I looked at. His size is going to allow him to take on the duties of a wide tight end at the NFL level. It felt like he has to be worked with to be molded into a good blocking tight end either. Sample is actually shown to be a pretty solid blocker. His hand placement and strength are what help him the most, but he has a good technique as well that help him sustain blocks. He's also good at improving his leverage by working to unlock his hips under his hands. The one last thing I have to say about his blocking is that he's a patient second-level blocker with the motor to be able to chase down targets in space if needed. Now, as a pass catcher, he's got some positives as well. From his tape, he's definitely best on crossing routes, like mesh routes and such. Or at least that's how Washington used him the most effectively. And it's because he opens his stride length to get the separation speed he needs to get open. He also has good initial burst into his routes, and that helps him as well. Then he's good at telling whether the defense is zone or man and will sink into space for his quarterback if necessary. Then as catcher, he's actually pretty solid. He's got good hands and can sharpen his focus even when there are bodies or hand traffic near the catch point. The last thing I will say is he has been described as a really smart player who's also task-oriented and keeps a serious demeanor. But now let's get to the negatives. I think the biggest thing holding Drew Sample back is he's going to need to improve his upper body and core strength to handle blocking at the NFL level, as he's really just average in strength for his size, and I think he knows that, as he didn't do the bench press at this year's Combine. Then as a pass catcher, his production has been pretty little, which is always a concern. Some of it has to do with his routes being pretty plain and predictable, and some is due to him not being able to create leverage while facing man coverage, which allows defenders to stick to him. Now, circling back to his blocking, he could take inconsistent angles and cut blocks, and analysts think he could benefit from learning to reset his hands and pass production when giving up his frame. The last thing is that while he has toughness, he could really use a little bit more edge to really stick it to opponents when blocking. That would come with increased strength, though. So scouts are going to be questioning Sample's production and strength for the NFL level, but personally, I'm only really worried about his strength. From what I saw on tape, the lack of production doesn't really worry me because I think he could be more successful at the NFL level in that regard. He's been compared to Colts tight end Jack Doyle, and I felt like that was a perfect comparison because of the size and how they play. Personally, I think Sample will go in the 4th round, but I was surprised to see some people have him going as late as the 6th. I can't see him falling that far. I can't even really see him falling out of the 4th round. If he does, he's going to be like the 2nd pick of the 5th round. I think he's for sure a 4th round pick, if not a little bit earlier, maybe. But that was Drew Sample out of Washington. Let's hear about Wesco.
Trayvon Wesco from West Virginia, nearby, brought in. I believe the Steelers visited him. I'll need to double check that. He's only 6'3", but 267 pounds. A big man. I watched his games against Kansas and Tennessee, and let me tell you something. I was not planning to watch tape on an offensive lineman because that's what I felt like I watched. Wesco was targeted just a handful of times in those games, and the dude blocked like all the time. And I'm not trying to say that it's a bad thing, and I'll get into why it's a good thing, but man, oh man, I was not prepared to watch this dude block on basically every offensive play, but I'll get into that. In any case, Wesco was an all-West Virginia athlete in football and basketball while in high school, started at Lackawanna College and caught 5 passes as a freshman, then redshirted and transferred to West Virginia, caught 1 pass as a redshirt sophomore, which was a 6-yard touchdown, and then caught 1 pass for 1 yard in his redshirt junior year of 2017, and then broke out a little bit in 2018, finishing fourth on the Mountaineers with 366 yards in 2018 on 26 receptions and caught 1 touchdown pass. Big 12 coaches thought he played well and named him first team All Big 12 for his performance. So I talked about him being an offensive lineman. That's because he's a damn good blocker. Despite being a little bit short for a tight end, Wesco fills his frame nicely and has a thick and powerful body. And because he's a little shorter, he plays with a good natural pad level due to his height and plays like an extra offensive lineman in the running game with terrific strength at the point of attack. He had 24 bench press reps at the combine, which was the best of any tight end there. He can kick out linebackers on the move, or he can block down on defensive linemen. Wherever you want him to block, he'll block. He offers a fantastic strike to his opponent and is a capable pass protector as well. As a matter of fact, he lined up in the backfield as an H-back at times as well. A lot, actually. He can assist in blocking good edge rushers and pass protection as well. So if you're trying to neutralize a guy like Von Miller, you can throw him out there to help block, not solo, but you can have him help a tackle who might not be very good, and he'll neutralize him. So despite not having a bunch on his resume as a pass catcher, he looked at his best as a receiver in the second half of his final season, coming on late. He's a willing blocker on kick returns, and basically there's not a whole lot to say about him being a receiver because I didn't see much and there wasn't much to see over his career, but he's an asset in the ground game for any team. You add him, that's like adding an offensive lineman who can catch the ball sometimes. That's huge. He is really invaluable in the ground game. I think any team would be lucky to have him. As far as negatives go for Trayvon Wesco, he's still working on his mechanics a bit as a run blocker, so he can get better. His feet need to get cleaned up a bit, and he needs to get his hands closer to the inside of his defender's chest across from him. He only caught 33 passes. This is the elephant in the room. Over the course of 4 seasons at 2 colleges, that's not much to go on. He has heavy feet and legs when running routes, and he's not a polished route runner. He doesn't succeed against man coverage, certainly not against athletic linebackers and safeties. And unlike Caden Smith, he doesn't open up to the quarterback very quickly, and he doesn't always get his hands in the best spot when trying to catch passes, which is kind of bizarre. He won't position his hands the way you would expect a player to normally do to try to catch a ball away from his body. It's kind of curious. So he clearly needs some coaching as a receiver. I'm not really sure what his upside is, but if you're looking for a tight end that can play H-back and is a fantastic blocker, you need look no further than Trayvon Wesco. This guy will help your offense run the football, and he can help protect your quarterback against edge rushers. But his work in the passing game just needs a lot of work, and there really isn't a ton of upside from what I can tell. There just isn't much that he's shown in 4 separate seasons. And I mean, he did come on late, but I really don't know how much better he can get. But still, I think Trayvon Wesco would be a good fit in Pittsburgh. He has a fantastic work ethic, and he'd be a good backup tight end in the future. Although right now I think he's probably headed for a practice squad. He's probably a develop and wait kind of guy for a year, and we know that the Steelers really need someone closer to being NFL ready. So time will tell, but I think he would be an interesting player to look at personally. So that was Trayvon Wesco from West Virginia. Talk to me about your final tight end. Really a specimen, I think is what you could call him, and Donald Parham from Stetson. Do you even know where Stetson is?
I looked it up because I'd never heard of it. It is in Central Florida, is what I learned.
Huh. Very interesting.
But anyway, yeah, he is 6'8" and 243 pounds. Obviously, the 6'8" is a rarity in the NFL, and that is why he's the specimen. Man has football in his blood. His father, 4 uncles, and cousin played in college, or played, I'm sorry. He, however, came on late and didn't decide to play football until his senior season in high school, where he played receiver. He decided to go to Stetson, and being 6'8", it seemed obvious to move Parham over to tight end. He played in 4 games in his freshman year, but didn't have any stats. But going into his sophomore year, he was able to start 6 of the 11 games he played in and finished second on the team in catches with 37, leading the team in touchdowns with 6 touchdowns, also getting 455 receiving yards in the process. In 2017, he earned honorable mention All Pioneer League honors for 58 catches, 817 yards, a 14.1 yards per catch, and 1 touchdown. His senior season is what got him is what got him recognized, though. He was a consensus FCS All-American and first-team All-Pioneer League by leading all FBS tight ends with 9.4 receptions per game and 146.6 receiving yards per game with 85 catches for 1,319 yards, a 15.5 yards per catch average, and 13 total touchdowns. His stats could have been even more insane had he not missed a game with a concussion. Also, if one of his games wasn't canceled due to Hurricane Florence. So, obviously the big thing that sticks out is his huge height at 6'8". His height really allows him to get up and get balls that really no NFL safety could defend. Along with the height comes an absolute massive arm span, which has given him a huge catch radius. It has helped him absolutely crush his level of competition with a massive amount of production over the past 2 years. He's also got speed to work with as well. He plays with up speed to separate himself from defenders down the seam and also uses long strides to add space out of his turns. Then there's a catcher, his soft, natural hands to pick balls out of the air away from his frame. He also uses said frame to defend that catch point. The final thing I would say is he didn't really get to do much blocking as he was essentially Stetson's most used player, but he did flash stalk blocking potential in space. So flipping to the other side, you already probably heard me say Drew Sample was the biggest tight end I was looking at weight-wise, and that should concern you when Parham is 3 inches taller than Sample while also being over 12 pounds less. Really just comes down to Parham being very tall and thin and needing additional play strength for the NFL. Realistically, he can't even be a tight end at the NFL level. The term tight end for him going into the draft is it's a pretty big stretch. He's essentially just an enormous wide receiver. I really personally wish he transferred too. His competition obviously did not challenge him. It is not like Stetson is a D1 school. I had never even heard of the Pioneer League as a whole until I looked at Parham. Realistically, he should have transferred to a bigger school after his first year of huge success. I can't imagine teams didn't try with his size. Like that, I'm sure bigger teams wanted to work with him. Then, even though he absolutely destroyed his competition, if the play wasn't going to him, or if he was double covered, he was playing with moderate effort, and that's a habit that will not fly at the NFL level. Same with his speed. He can play faster, but sometimes he just chooses not to. Then another problem, he wasn't asked to run a lot of complex routes either. Most stuff he was doing was very basic, which further hurts him, as he can't even say he has a large route tree he ran at Stetson. Final couple things are that he has a below-average balance or sharp route breaks, and likely will only be a mismatch in the slot at the NFL level. So it's quite obvious that Donald Parham is mostly getting buzz for what he could be molded into. His size is not typically found in the football world. It's about at basketball level. And he actually played basketball as well, but he chose to stick to football. And I think that makes sense. I think he's just average at basketball, while teams would desire him for his rare size at this level. Teams are 100% not caring about his production, really. He played against very weak opponents, but that height and catch rate is going to have teams salivating and try and work with him. He's going to have to rebrand as a wide receiver at first for sure, though. He is way too thin for an NFL tight end. It definitely does not have the muscle mass of one either. So at the end of the day, if not for last year, I would have thought he would have been a priority free agent. But last year's draft, we saw a rugby player turned offensive lineman who didn't even play football at all prior to be drafted get taken in the 7th round by the Eagles because of his massive size. And I think the same happens here. I think a team takes a flyer on this guy. They're trying to take his amazing physical gifts and mold him into a good NFL player. If he goes undrafted, he's going to be a priority undrafted free agent, though. I'm guaranteeing that if he goes undrafted, he's going to be requested by almost every single NFL team to come join them. But I think he's going in the 7th round, if I'm being honest. So that was Donald Parham from Stetson. Let's hear about your final prospect.
Well, Austin, I see you have a 6'8" tight end, and I'll raise you another 6'8" tight end. It's Zach Gentry from Michigan, a redshirt junior, standing again at 6'8", and this time 265 pounds. I watched his games against Florida and Michigan State. Gentry was a top 10 quarterback recruit in high school, and for some reason, Jim Harbaugh had him switch to tight end his first season when he redshirted for whatever reason. Anyways, I guess it did work out kind of well because we are talking about him, but he didn't have a catch in his 2016 season before starting 11 of 13 games in 2017, won the Wolverines' Most Improved Offensive Player of the Year award, catching 17 passes for 303 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he built on that this season with a third-team All-Big Ten selection in 2018, catching 32 passes for 514 yards and 2 touchdowns. So Gentry has a decent frame but stands to add more muscle so he can become stronger. That's a good thing. He takes good angles on blocks and has good hand placement on his blocks, and due to working with a lot of double teams at Michigan, Zach Gentry has experience and is good at working towards the second level of the defense. And despite not being overly athletic, being a former quarterback, he was a good running quarterback in high school. He reads the defense like 1-2, so he kind of works in sync with the quarterback. We saw Heath Miller do this a lot with Ben Roethlisberger. Gentry has good acceleration up the seam. He's obviously very tall, so he'll be a mismatch for linebackers and therefore won't need much separation as long as he gets the ball thrown in his area code. He has smooth cuts out of his breaks, and his height makes him a valuable weapon in the middle of the field. Gentry, again, a former running quarterback, is aware and able to improvise in scrambling situations well. Unfortunately, he's not getting enough out of his upper body right now in terms of blocking. Gentry doesn't have great play strength and got blown up several times against Michigan State, including one play that was rather embarrassing where he got knocked back into the backfield so quick he upended his own running back in the backfield. That was quite embarrassing. His down blocks aren't successful, especially when he's one-on-one with a defender, and he's way too passive in kicking out edge defenders when he has to come across a formation. He lined up as an H-back, and whenever he had to cross the formation on kick-out blocks to block an unblocked defensive end, he just never imposed as well, and I always wanted more out of that. Gentry is also prone to drops. His hand-eye coordination is not good, and he doesn't find the hole in the zone like good tight ends normally do. Not a whole lot on Zach Gentry. He's a later-round guy. He's got fantastic size and played for a school and a coach that typically develops good tight ends, specifically blocking tight ends, but teams that look at him may want to think twice, similar to Donald Parham, like you were talking about. Gentry has limited upside as a blocker because he is so tall. He's actually only 1 inch taller than Jesse James was coming out of college, but even though they look similar, James was certainly much more of a tight end and a better blocker. James was more refined, and Gentry is a better route runner, but the potential as a receiver in space has some teams interested, but a poor showing at the Combine really pushed him down to a mid to late day 3 pick. I think Gentry better projects as a receiver, but I could see why teams would want him as a blocker, but I just think that would be a mistake. He's a split-out wide tight end or a receiver. That's really what it looks like at the end of the day. Similar to what we saw from Devin Funchess, but again, different type of player, but Michigan tight end that became a wide receiver. So an interesting prospect, but certainly unlike any of the other guys I looked at. So that was Zach Gentry. So now that wraps up kind of the process of evaluating each guy individually. Now that we've looked at each of our 5 guys, Austin, do me a favor and rank all of them for me in terms of how you think they best fit with the Steelers.
So last podcast I started with worst and went to best. On this one I'm going to reverse it back and do best to worst. Starting off, Drew Sample. He was my favorite tight end out of the ones I looked at. I love Jack Doyle. He's been on my fantasy team in the past 2 years now, so I followed him actually a bunch. And as soon as I saw Sample was compared to him, I was already liking the idea before I saw tape. Then the fact of the matter is, Sample can really do it all. He can block, he can catch, he's smart. I feel like he would be perfect. Best of all, a lot of analysts think he's going to go as late as the 6th round, and that would be a steal, like Kittle going in the 5th, in my mind at least. I mean, I don't think it's going to be as good as Kittle, so don't take it like that. But I think that if Sample falls all the way to the 6th round, that would be an absolute steal. But so he's my favorite. Then moving on, I have Alize Mack. He comes in next, and it makes sense since I called him a sleeper in this draft. I was really impressed after he held his own against Rashawn Gary when he played against Michigan. And again, I really think Notre Dame's quarterback is a big reason Mack's production wasn't great. But I think teams realize that, and I think he's going to go higher than Drew Sample. but not be that much better than Drew Sample. So he falls to second for me because of the price tag. Then after that is Irv Smith Jr. I liked what he offered, but I just didn't like his work ethic. It may be unfair, but also watching his drop against Georgia really left a bad taste in my mouth. And with him projected to go in the second round, I wouldn't want the Steelers to take him that high. If he falls to the third, I would be all for it, though. After that is Foster Moreau. And it's really just because I feel like the Steelers don't need what he has to offer. Steelers need another tight end that can do a little bit of everything. And to me, Moreau was never going to develop beyond a run blocker. Like I said, I think Moreau's going to last a long time in the NFL doing what he does, but it's not what the Steelers need, in my opinion. And that leaves Donald Parham last. And to be quite frank, I was just super uninterested. Steelers essentially have an extra roster spot for a developmental tight end with Christian Scotland Williamson because of the program trying to integrate players from around the world into the NFL that allows them to keep him as an 11th man on the practice squad. I don't feel like the Steelers need to waste a roster spot on another super developmental tight end, and I really don't want them to waste a draft pick on him. They need a guy that can contribute now. It's just Parham is not a guy that the Steelers really need. They need a guy that could contribute at like day one. Needs to be a guy that could come in behind Vance McDonald. So Donald Parham didn't fit that. So how do you rank your prospects?
Number one, this probably isn't hard to figure out. I have T.J. Hawkinson. He's my favorite prospect I've looked at so far in this pre-draft analysis. And if he falls to 20, even with Devin Bush on the board, I'd be really, really tempted to take Hawkinson. And that's how much I like everything that he has put on the table. I think he could be a great tight end for a decade in this league. Caden Smith is second for me. And while Noah Fant is a superior player in my mind, I think Smith fits better with the Steelers. And although he only projects as a number 2 tight end at best, I think the fact that you don't have to spend a high draft pick on him makes him preferable, since the hole is at the tight end number 2 position, not the starting tight end. And he's a guy that can do it all, similar to what Jesse James did. So I like Caden Smith second. Third, I have Trayvon Wesco. Look, if I were Kevin Colbert, I'd take a hard look at Wesco if he's still on the board in the 6th or 7th rounds, or if he's available as an undrafted free agent. I might try to pounce on him. His blocking skills are just too good to ignore. But his raw skills and his poor route running and lack of production as a college receiver would have me concerned. I almost wonder if some teams would consider moving him to offensive line. But regardless, he shouldn't be contributing this season, and if he does, then something went wrong. But still, I think he's a good fit as long as he's not selected too early. Fourth, I have Noah Fant. Man, I keep thinking about what it must have been to be the offensive coordinator on Iowa this past season for the Hawkeyes, having 2 NFL caliber tight ends. That must have been really nice. But back to Noah Fant. At the end of the day, he's just doesn't fit the mold of a Steelers tight end as well as T.J. Hawkinson does. And his struggles as a blocker just aren't something that I would really want to deal with. When you think about it, you bring him in, he's going to be the number 2 tight end behind Vance McDonald. The Steelers usually want their number 2 guy to be a good blocker. I mean, you think about the past 10 years, all of their number 2 tight ends, whether it be Jesse James behind Vance McDonald, he was at least a capable blocker. Behind Keith Miller, you had Matt Spaeth, who was maybe even almost as good of a blocker as Miller was. And then in Miller's early portion of his career, you had Jeremy Tooman and Mark Bruner, guys that, even before Heath Miller, guys that were fantastic blockers. That's just not what Noah Fant is. So I just don't think the Steelers would take a high pick on him, only to have him not be a good blocker, or at least not early on. Finally, I have Zach Gentry. Look, I like Gentry. In fact, I liked every tight end I looked at. All these guys I'm a fan of. He reminds me a lot of Jesse James too, but even Jesse James was a decent blocker in the NFL. I'm not convinced that Zach Gentry can be that. He's very tall and thin, looking more like a receiver than a tight end on tape. Even when filling out that frame, I'm not sure he can be relied upon in the ground game. I do like his upside as a receiver, but again, the Steelers don't take tight ends that can block to be their number 2 guy. So that being said, I think the tight end room is going to look a little different in 2019. Obviously, Jesse James will be gone, but I think the Steelers keep just 3 next year, Austin. Vance McDonald, obviously the incumbent starter. I think a draft pick will be the number 2 tight end. And then I have Bucky Hodges usurping Xavier Grimble as the number 3 tight end this year. I just think it's time for something new, and I don't hate Grimble or anything, but I think they've had the number 3 tight end for long enough, and usually number 3 tight ends don't stay on a roster for more than a handful of seasons.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go with Vance McDonald first, which obviously makes sense. Then, after thinking about it, I originally had Bucky Hodges as the number 2, just as a surprise change-up. But I'm going to change it up even more. I think the draft pick is going to be number 2, like you have. But number 3, I am going to say it's Xavier Grimble. After thinking about it, the Steelers put a pretty they paid him a good amount to come back. I mean, they put an original around tender on him, which is more than he probably should have as the tight end 3 that hasn't really done much. I mean, he even fumbled against Denver. So I think they're going to have Xavier Grimble still as the number 3 after thinking about how he got an original round tender this year. So Vance McDonald, draft pick, Xavier Grimble.
You know, that is still true, but you can still cut him for without any cap penalty.
Yeah, that's true.
Regardless, the fact of the matter remains the Steelers need a number 2 tight end. All right, let's talk about some NFL news, and there's one big headline. You want to address that?
Yeah, DeMarcus Lawrence signed a 5-year, $105 million mega deal. $65 million of that is guaranteed. He got almost. I believe it's in the first year, it's the most made by any non-quarterback in the entire league. It's absolutely insane, and he won out. He finally got what he deserved. I think that because he had to prove himself for 2 seasons before he got paid. Kind of similar to Le'Veon Bell, actually, because he got suspended in 2016 when he was still a young buck. But it pays off for him, and Frank Clark and Jadeveon Clowney are smiling at home, knowing they're going to earn themselves $20 million a year, just like DeMarcus Lawrence.
Lawrence, in his 5 NFL seasons, has had 2 seasons with more than 10 sacks, those coming in his last 2 seasons. He had an 8-sack season in 2015, had 0 in his rookie season of 2014, and only had 1 in a 2016 season, which I believe had injuries involved. But he's definitely one of the premier pass rushers in the game, and at only 26 years old, this looks like a good deal for both sides, in my opinion.
Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot.
All right, and we talked about the AAF earlier, but one good thing about the AAF collapsing is the fact that the AAF has been able to get some alums to be signed by NFL teams. So we've got a list of them. We already talked about the Steelers signees and invitations for workouts. Let's address the best quarterback in the league, maybe the best player in the league, and Garrett Gilbert, who led the AAF in passing yards, was the front runner for MVP. He was signed by the Cleveland Browns after being brought in. He also visited with the Minnesota Vikings, I believe. So what do you think about that?
I think it's a good signing. He could possibly get back on the NFL roster and back up Baker Mayfield possibly. So that would be pretty cool for him. The Browns are an up-and-coming team according to most people, so it's a pretty good team to join as of right now. It's a good team to hop on the wagon. So I think it was a good signing.
2 former San Antonio Commanders, Deron Smith and Duke Thomas, signed with the Vikings. The Carolina Panthers have been very active. They signed a handful of them, including offensive lineman Kit O'Brien and Parker Collins. Collins, you might remember, was a Steeler last season. The Oakland Raiders signed defensive end Alex Barrett, previously of the San Diego Fleet, Austin. And we already talked about the Steelers signing 2 former Birmingham Iron players. Offensive lineman Michael Dunn from the Iron as well signed with the Dolphins. Cornerback Devontae Bowsby with the San Antonio Commanders signed with the Denver Broncos. Andrew Ankara signed with the Washington Redskins. He played for the Orlando Apollos. And finally, probably the best, in fact, I'd be willing to say the best interior defensive lineman in the AAF, Demontre Moore from the San Diego Fleet, signed with the, who was it? The 49ers. 49ers.
That's my man. That was my favorite signing. I was waiting to see where Demontre Moore went, so I know that for a fact he went to the 49ers.
You like the move?
I do. I was really upset. I was kind of hoping Demontre Moore would sneak onto the Steelers somehow because he was my favorite AAF player. Well, I kept saying it, but the San Diego Fleet had the best defensive line in the AAF. That's why Alex Barrett is now where he is, and that's why DeMontre Moore is now with the 49ers. I think Soto is going to sign somewhere, who is also part of the San Diego Fleet's defensive line. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm glad that these guys are landed somewhere. At least some of these guys are getting a chance again.
Let's talk about some other guys that could be getting a chance. We've heard, who was it? Someone is getting looked at by several teams. I think it's Jamar Summers. Casey Sales is another one. What about, this is just Iron players, but like Trent Richardson or Rashard Ross signed with the Panthers as well. I think he was the first. Keith Rieser signed with the Chiefs. I mean, who else could be guys that could be signed? I'd have to think Carter Schultz would be signed by somebody.
I think Terrence Garvin is going to find his way back into the NFL. He played really, really well in the AAF, and obviously he was a former Steeler, Seahawk, and there's another team besides the Steelers and Seahawks, but I can't remember. But I think he's going to get back into the NFL, and I'm not really sure. I would have thought Jaquan Gardner from the Fleet, but now he's injured, so I kind of doubt it at this point for him, which is unfortunate. Yeah, I don't really know who else. Do you have anyone else in mind?
I'm trying to see here. All right, I have the full list right here. I'll see if there's anything else. Oh, the website just crashed. I saw Jarrell Presley was facing a 2-game suspension.
Oh, yeah, I saw that too. But I think he's still expected to join the league. Did we also talk about that edge from Atlanta that the Steelers were bringing in?
Yeah, we did. JT Jones.
Oh, okay, yeah, I forgot if we mentioned it already.
Who else? I think we got everybody. Yeah, we did get everybody. The other players that have been working out, kicker Nick Rose worked out with the Bears. Younghoe Koo worked out for the Bears as well. Quarterback Luis Perez worked out for the Eagles. Jarrell Presley worked out for 2 teams. Brandon Silvers of the Express worked out for the Jets and Vikings. And John Wolford worked out for the Vikings. So there's still some guys, but I'd have to think that other guys are going to get their chance too.
Oh, what about the best wide receiver from the entire AAF, probably? Charles Johnson. Johnson's probably going to get some looks.
Charles Johnson, I believe, had the most experience of any player from the AAF. I mean, he's 30 years old.
Yeah, and he performed really well. So I think that he might get back into the league as well.
I'm trying to see if there's any information right now. There's a different Charles Johnson, the defensive end. Let's see. 2 days ago. No, it's just saying Charles Johnson was free to sign with teams. So no information as of right now.
I totally think that he's still going to get some eventually, because it doesn't make sense. He was one of the best wide receivers in the league, and he was like a step above everyone else. Because I was looking for DeMontre Moore the first day too, and there was nothing like immediately. So I think Charles Johnson might be getting a few offers like that are actually like not minimum. Like I think Ross that went to the Panthers actually didn't get a minimum deal. He actually got a more expensive deal, not like much more expensive, but he was like a priority. I guess other teams wanted him as well. So some of these guys are getting multiple offers and actually are getting to like negotiate.
People with the last name Johnson that are in the NFL need to stop having the first name Charles, because there's Charles Johnson, the defensive end. There's now this Charles Johnson, and there's also a Charles Johnson who played with the Pittsburgh Steelers for 5 seasons in the 90s and played up until 2002 with the Bills. Another Charles Johnson, Austin.
I guess there's just I guess it's a common name.
Evidently, it is the case. I mean, you think Charles and Johnson, that's a pretty common name. But anyways, Charles Johnson, the Steelers' former receiver, led the team in receiving yards in 1996, so having over 1,000 yards, so just fun fact. Okay, we're running long, so we'll wrap up this episode. We just finished talking about tight ends. Next is cornerbacks. We're getting right into the thick of things. We got cornerback, edge, wide receiver, and inside linebacker. So we're almost done here, Austin. We're fast approaching the draft, and we're very excited as we keep going. So we hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you have any questions, please feel free to email the show with questions at strongerthansteelpodcast@gmail.com. And as always, check out our website, strongerthansteelnfl.blogspot.com. Austin, do you have anything you want to add tonight?
Just want to say that even though it's not their most required position anymore, or not even up there with the signing of Steven Nelson, this next podcast is the one I'm most excited to do. I've been waiting to do cornerbacks for so long because there's been so many that I want to look at that I just kept hearing about, and it's a really exciting class for me, so I'm excited.
Very deep, to be sure. But as always, have a terrific night from the Stronger Than Steel podcast, and we'll catch you again next time.
Have a good night.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.